Tonight, we'll take you on another quiet journey through time, into one of history's more brutal chapters, told gently so your mind can rest while the past unfolds. I said you were beautiful, the kind that draws gods like moths and ruins like fire. You know, before all this, unpleasantness, you were just a girl who really, really loved her hair. Golden strands that caught sunlight like they were trying to start fires. The other priestesses used to joke that you spent more time with your reflection than with your prayers. They weren't wrong. You were chosen to serve Athena when you were barely old enough to braid your own locks properly. Chosen, what a word. Makes it sound like an honor, doesn't it? Like being picked for the good team in whatever divine sport the gods were playing that decade. The Temple of Athena Parthenos in Athens was magnificent. All marble columns and echoing chambers, where whispers turned into songs and songs into promises to the goddess of wisdom. The work wasn't particularly taxing. Tend the sacred flame, sweep the marble floors until they gleamed like mirrors, prepare offerings of olives and honey, brush your hair until it shone like spun gold, because apparently Athena appreciated beautiful things in her service. At least, that's what the high priestess told you. Your beauty honors the goddess, she'd say, which seemed like a perfectly reasonable arrangement to you. You took pride in your appearance the way a craftsman takes pride in his pottery. Every morning, you'd wake before dawn and spend an hour with your ivory comb, working through each strand until it flowed like liquid sunlight. The other acolytes would roll their eyes, but you caught them watching sometimes, their own fingers unconsciously touching their own hair, wondering if they were doing it right. The temple attracted visitors from across the Greek world. Philosophers came to debate in the shadow of Athena's statue. Merchants came to pray for successful voyages. Young men came to look at the priestesses, if we're being honest. You were supposed to be pure, untouchable, devoted only to the goddess. But you weren't blind. You saw the way they lingered near the altar, the way their eyes followed you as you moved through your daily rituals. You remember thinking you were safe there, protected by marble walls and divine favor. The temple was a sanctuary after all, a place where the goddess herself dwelt, where her wisdom and strength formed an invisible shield around those who served her faithfully. What could possibly go wrong in the house of the goddess of wisdom? Oh, sweet summer child that you were. It was a Tuesday when your life ended. You remember because you always did the deep cleaning on Tuesdays, scrubbing the floors until they gleamed, polishing the bronze fixtures until they sparkled like stars. You were alone in the inner sanctum, working on the area around Athena's statue, when you heard footsteps. Heavy ones. Not the light padding of bare feet that marked the other priestesses, but the confident stride of someone who owned every room they entered. You turned, expecting to see one of the high priests, maybe come to check on your work. Instead, you found yourself face to face with divinity itself. Not the gentle, wise presence of Athena, but something altogether more intense. Poseidon stood in the doorway, sea spray still clinging to his dark hair, his eyes the colour of storm-tossed waves. "Lord Poseidon," he said, dropping into the proper bow, "how may I serve you in Athena's temple?" He smiled, and you felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. "Oh, I think you know exactly how you can serve me." Now here's the thing about gods. They don't really ask permission. They don't need to. They're gods. The concepts of no and please stop and this is Athena's sacred space don't really apply to them. They want something, they take it. Simple as that. He tried to explain that you were sworn to chastity, that the temple was sacred, that surely he wouldn't want to offend his niece Athena by doing what he was clearly planning to do. But Poseidon just laughed, a sound like waves crashing against rocks. "Athena's not here," he said, and suddenly the air tasted of salt and seaweed. "Just you and me and all this lovely marble." You ran. Of course you ran. Have you ever tried to outrun an earthquake? Because that's essentially what you were attempting. Poseidon is the god of the sea, of horses, of earthquakes. Running from him is like trying to outrun the tide, pointless and exhausting and ultimately futile. He caught you in front of Athena's statue, where you'd thrown yourself down in desperate prayer. "Please, you whispered to the marble goddess. Please protect me. I've served you faithfully. I've kept my vows. Please. But Athena's statue just stared ahead with painted eyes, serene and untouchable, and completely useless. What happened next? Well, let's just say that Poseidon got what he came for. Right there, on the sacred floor, in front of the goddess you'd devoted your life to serving. And through it all, you kept waiting for divine intervention, for Athena to appear in a flash of wisdom and fury to defend her priestess, for the temple itself to reject this violation of its sanctity. Nothing. Just cold marble and the sound of your own tears hitting the floor. When it was over, Poseidon straightened his robes and ran a hand through his salt-damp hair. Give my regards to Athena, he said, and vanished in a spray of sea foam that left the temple smelling like low tide. You lay there for a long time, staring up at Athena's statue, waiting for something. An apology? An explanation? A sign that this wasn't somehow your fault? But the goddess remained silent, and eventually you dragged yourself to the sacred pool to wash away the salt and shame. The other priestesses found you there an hour later, scrubbing your skin raw with pumice stones. They took one look at your face and knew exactly what had happened. This wasn't the first time a god had decided to help himself to one of Athena's priestesses. It probably wouldn't be the last. You'll need to tell the high priestess, one of them said gently. You nodded, though you already knew how that conversation would go. Gods will be gods. These things happen. The important thing was to maintain the temple's reputation and continue serving faithfully. But when you knelt before the high priestess that evening, something strange happened. Instead of the expected sympathy and discretion, she looked at you with something like disgust. You were defiled, she said, and the word hit you like a slap. In the goddess's own temple. Her sacred space has been polluted. I didn't. I tried to stop him. I prayed. I ran. But you failed. She stood, her robes rustling like autumn leaves. The question now is what Athena will do about this transgression. That night, you dreamed of owls, hundreds of them, their golden eyes fixed on you with an intelligence that felt distinctly unfriendly. You woke with the strangest sensation, as if tiny things were crawling across your scalp. When you reached up to scratch, your fingers came away with something that looked like scales. You rushed to the bronze mirror in your cell and stared at your reflection. Your beautiful golden hair was still there, but it seemed to be moving, writhing. You blinked hard. Sure, you were still dreaming, but when you opened your eyes, the movement was more pronounced. That's when you realized the truth. Athena hadn't ignored your prayers after all. She'd heard them perfectly clearly. She'd simply decided that the best way to handle the situation was to punish you. Because obviously, when a god commits assault in your temple, the logical response is to curse the victim. Obviously. You touched your hair again, and this time, something definitely bit you. The transformation was just beginning. Have you ever had a really bad haircut? Imagine waking up with snakes for hair. The thing about waking up with a head full of serpents is that nobody prepares you for the logistics. You'd think there'd be a scroll somewhere, so you've been cursed a practical guide to mythological transformations. But apparently, the gods expect you to figure it out as you go. Very them, really. Your first morning was educational. You woke to what you thought was the sound of heavy rain on the temple roof, but when you sat up, you realized it was just your new hair hissing. All of it, in harmony, like a very angry, very reptilian choir. You caught sight of yourself in the bronze mirror, and honestly, your first thought wasn't horror or despair. It was, well, this is going to make morning grooming significantly more complicated. The snakes, and there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, you never got an exact count, weren't just decorative. They had opinions, strong ones. The one that used to be your favourite curl, the one that had always caught the light just right, was now a particularly aggressive little viper that seemed to have appointed itself your hair's spokesperson. It kept trying to bite your ears when you didn't move fast enough. "Excuse me," you said to your reflection, addressing the serpent directly, "but I haven't had breakfast yet, and I'm not particularly interested in your editorial comments about my morning routine." The snake hissed louder, and you swear it rolled its tiny eyes. The other priestesses found you like that, having a heated argument with your own hair. Their reactions were varied. Some screamed, some fainted. One enterprising girl tried to help by grabbing a knife to cut the curse away, which resulted in her getting bitten by 3 different snakes simultaneously. Apparently, your new hair was quite protective of itself. "What did you do?" the high priestess demanded when she arrived, summoned by the commotion. "I existed," you replied, which seemed to cover most of your recent crimes. She circled you like you were a particularly problematic piece of pottery that might explode at any moment. "This is Athena's judgment. You've been transformed." Transformed. You tested the word. It sounded so much nicer than cursed or punished for being assaulted by your boss's uncle. "And the snakes are the least of your problems," she gestured to the bronze mirror. "Look at yourself. Really look." You did, and that's when you noticed the other changes. Your eyes, once a warm brown, now glowed with an inner light that made them look like golden coins. Your skin had taken on a subtle scaled pattern that caught the light like armor. And your face was still beautiful, but it was a terrible alien beauty that made you want to look away and never stop looking at the same time. "The curse is threefold," the high priestess explained, consulting a scroll that had materialized from somewhere. "First, your appearance has been altered. Second, your hair has become serpentine. And third," she paused dramatically, "which you thought was unnecessary given the circumstances. Third," he prompted, "anyone who looks directly at you will turn to stone." You blinked. Several of your snakes stopped hissing. "I'm sorry, what?" "Stone. Marble, to be precise. Athene always was particular about her materials. So I can't look at anyone." "Oh, you can look at them all you want. It's when they look at you that things get complicated." You spent the next hour practicing in your cell, using the bronze mirror to understand the mechanics of your new existence. The stone-turning thing was apparently triggered by direct eye contact, which seemed like a design flaw if you asked anyone. How were you supposed to have a conversation with someone if looking at them turned them into a statue? The answer, you discovered, was that you weren't supposed to have conversations with anyone, ever again. The high priestess made this clear when she returned, with your relocation papers. Apparently you were being transferred to a lovely new position as a hermit on a remote island. For the safety of others, of course. Can't have a Gorgon wandering around Athens, turning the citizenry into garden ornaments. "It's not personal," she assured you as you packed your few belongings. "It's just that you're rather dangerous now. I didn't ask to be dangerous. I didn't ask for any of this. Nevertheless, here we are. The boat leaves at dawn." That night you discovered another unpleasant side effect of your transformation. You couldn't sleep. Every time you closed your eyes, you could hear the snakes whispering to each other in voices too low for human ears, but perfectly audible to you. They were gossiping, apparently, about you. "Too well," agreed the aggressive spokesman snake. "We expected more screaming." "Give her time," said a third voice, from somewhere near your crown. "The reality hasn't set in yet." "And what reality?" you asked aloud. The snakes fell silent for a moment. Then spokesman snake answered, "That you're not human anymore, that you're never going home, that everyone you've ever cared about will either run from you or turn to stone if they see you." You considered this. "That's actually a fair point." "We know," said the crown snake smugly. "We're very wise. It comes with the territory." The boat to your new island home was cramped. The captain, a weathered man named Theseus, not that Theseus, just a regular guy with an unfortunately heroic name, had been paid extra to transport you without looking directly at you. This led to some amusing moments where he'd shout instructions to you while facing the opposite direction. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he'd call out, staring determinedly at the horizon. "Lovely," you'd agree, watching dolphins pace your boat. "Though I think those clouds might mean rain." "What clouds?" he'd ask, then catch himself. "Don't answer that. I don't want to accidentally turn around. The island, when you finally reached it, was everything you'd expect from a place designated as a monster's lair. Rocky, isolated, surrounded by treacherous currents that would deter casual visitors. There was a cave complex that had been prepared for you, which meant someone had left a few amphorae of oil and a bag of grain. Apparently the gods expected you to figure out the rest. "This is it," Captain Theseus announced, still facing away from you. "Your new home. The locals call it Sarpedon's Rock, on account of the previous resident." What happened to the previous resident? Eaten by a sea monster, but don't worry. Sea monsters don't usually bother Gorgons. Professional courtesy, you might say. The first few weeks were challenging. Have you ever tried to start a fire when your hair keeps trying to help by striking at the flint? Or attempted to cook when every movement makes dozens of snakes writhe and hiss complaints? Your new roommates had very strong opinions about your housekeeping. "The cave is too damp," Spokesman Snake would complain. "The fish you caught yesterday was off," added Crown Snake. "And could you please stop crying?" said a new voice from the back of your head. "The salt is making us all itchy." But gradually you adapted. The snakes and you developed a working relationship. They'd watch for dangers you couldn't see, warn you about weather changes, and occasionally catch small prey. In return, you'd find sunny spots where they could bask and avoid making sudden movements that disturbed their rest. The loneliness was harder to adapt to. You'd been surrounded by people your entire life. First your family, then the other priestesses. Always voices and laughter and the comfortable noise of human community. Now you had only the snakes for company, and while they were chatty, they weren't exactly stimulating conversationalists. That's when the heroes started arriving. The first one was named Bellerophon, a young man with more confidence than sense who'd heard rumours of a monster on Sarpedon's Rock. He arrived on a winged horse, which, you had to admit, was a nice touch, very dramatic. He landed on the beach below your cave and immediately began shouting challenges. "Come out, beast. Face me in honourable combat." You peered down at him from behind a boulder. "Honourable combat? I'm a woman with snake hair, not a dragon. What exactly are you planning to fight me with?" "My sword, my courage, my pure heart." "Your pure heart?" You couldn't help but laugh. "That's going to be extremely useful when you turn to stone the moment you look at me. I fear no curse." Well, you should. Curses are significantly more dangerous than most people give them credit for. But he was already charging up the rocky path to your cave, sword gleaming in the afternoon sun. You sighed and retreated deeper into the shadows. You'd learned that if you stayed in the darkness, visitors couldn't see you clearly enough to trigger the curse. Usually. Bellerophon burst into the cave like a one-man army, ready to battle the forces of darkness. Instead, he found you sitting by your small fire, mending a torn chiton. You're beautiful," he said, which was sweet but ultimately problematic. "Don't look directly at me," you warned. "Trust me on this." "But you're beautiful," he repeated, as if this somehow negated the whole turning to stone issue. "And you're about to be a statue. Look away." He didn't listen. They never do. Heroes as a species are remarkably bad at following directions. He took 3 steps toward you, your eyes met, and suddenly you had your first garden ornament. The statue was actually quite good. Athena, for all her vindictiveness, had an artist's eye. Bellerophon was frozen mid-step, sword raised, expression heroically determined. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was just taking a dramatic pause. "Well," said Spokesman Snake, "that was predictable." "Should we move him outside?" asked Crown Snake. "He's rather large for indoor decoration." "Leave him," you said. "Maybe the next hero will be smarter." Spoiler alert, the next hero was not smarter. Over the following months you accumulated quite a collection. There was Lycaon, who'd tried to sneak up on you while you were bathing. The snakes spotted him first. Theron, who'd attempted to use a polished shield as a mirror to look at you indirectly, clever, but not clever enough. Nicias, who'd brought a net, apparently planning to capture you alive. The snakes had found this particularly hilarious. Each statue was perfect, captured in marble at the moment of transformation. Some looked terrified, others determined, a few confused. You started arranging them around the cave entrance like a warning to future visitors. It didn't work. If anything, it seemed to attract more heroes. Apparently, a collection of petrified champions was like a challenge to the ones still breathing. You'd think, you said to the snakes one evening, as you sat between the statues of two particularly persistent heroes, that word would get around. Hey, maybe don't go to the island where everyone turns to stone. Heroes aren't known for their listening skills, Spokesman Snake pointed out. If they were, they'd be philosophers, not heroes. Fair point. The loneliness was getting to you, though. It's one thing to be isolated by choice, another to be surrounded by perfect marble companions who never spoke, never laughed, never did anything but stand there looking heroically frozen. Sometimes you'd catch yourself trying to start conversations with them. "Beautiful sunset tonight, isn't it, Bellerophon?" you'd say, and for just a moment, you'd wait for an answer that would never come. The snakes tried to be supportive, in their own way. They'd share gossip from the seabirds, tell you about the weather patterns they could sense, occasionally catch fish for dinner. But they were part of you now, extensions of your curse rather than true companions. Talking to them was like talking to yourself, which is to say, not particularly satisfying. That's when you started hoping that someday someone would come who was clever enough to actually talk to you. Someone who could figure out a way around the curse, who could see you as more than just a monster to be slain. You should have been more careful what you wished for. I banished you to a rock in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by sea and silence, and the occasional idiot with a sword. You know what nobody tells you about being an immortal monster living alone on a cursed island? The interior decorating options are extremely limited. You'd been on Sarpedon's rock for about 2 years when you finally accepted that this was your life now. Not your temporary exile, not your punishment, with an end to date, but your actual permanent existence. The snakes had been trying to tell you this for months, but you'd been stubbornly clinging to the idea that someone would eventually come to their senses and reverse the curse. "Face it," Spokesman Snake said one morning as you sat on your favourite cliff watching the sunrise. "Athena's not known for her forgiveness." "You're here forever." "Forever is a very long time," you replied, tossing pebbles into the waves below. "Exactly our point. Might want to make the place more homey." So you did. You turned your cave into something approaching livable. Not comfortable, mind you. It's difficult to achieve true comfort when you're sharing space with a dozen marble heroes who never blink and judge you silently from their perfect stone eyes. But livable. You started with the practical things. You built a proper hearth using stones from the beach, with a chimney that vented through a crack in the cave roof. You wove reed mats for the floor, and fashioned furniture from driftwood and salvaged materials from the various heroes' equipment. Amazing how much useful stuff a dead hero leaves behind. Bellerophon's saddlebags alone had yielded a bronze mirror, a whetstone, 3 daggers, dried meat, and a surprisingly good bottle of wine. "You're looting corpses," Crown Snake observed as you sorted through the latest arrival's belongings. "I'm recycling," you corrected. "These men came here to kill me. The least they can do is contribute to my household economy." The garden was where you really let your artistic side flourish. You arranged your statue collection with care, creating little tableaux around the cave entrance. Bellerophon got a place of honor by the door, since he'd been your first. Lycaon, the would-be voyeur, you positioned facing the wall. Seemed appropriate. The twins, Castor and Pollux, not those twins, different ones, you placed flanking the path to the beach, like the world's most permanent honor guard. "It's getting crowded," said a snake from near your left temple. "Then maybe heroes should stop coming here to die," you replied, stepping back to admire your work. "Besides, I think it looks homey. It looks like a tomb. A well-organized tomb. The isolation should have driven you mad. Probably would have if you'd still been fully human, but the curse had changed more than just your appearance. Your mind had become sharper, more detached, as if you were viewing the world through a lens that filtered out things like despair and self-pity. The snake said it was a survival mechanism, that madness would have defeated the purpose of your punishment. "Athena wants you to suffer," Spokesman Snake explained one day. "Can't suffer properly if you're completely insane. You'd just be babbling to yourself about fish and weather, instead of having coherent conversations with my snake hair." "Exactly. See how much better this is?" You developed routines to keep yourself occupied. Mornings were for fishing and gathering shellfish from the tide pools. Afternoons for maintenance, mending nets, sharpening tools, positioning new statues. Evenings for, well, mostly for sitting by your fire and trying not to think about how everyone you'd ever known was living their lives without you. The snakes tried to be good company, but they had their limitations. They couldn't feel loneliness, couldn't understand why you sometimes spent entire days just staring at the horizon, hoping to see a sail that carried someone, anyone who might want to talk instead of fight. "Why do you do that?" Crowned Snake asked one afternoon as you sat in your usual spot watching the empty sea. "Watch for ships. You know anyone who comes here either wants to kill you or will run screaming when they see you. Maybe someday someone different will come." "Someone different? Like what?" You considered this. "Someone who isn't a hero. Someone who's just curious." Curious people don't usually sail to mysterious islands alone. "Then someone who's lost?" "Lost people usually want to leave as quickly as possible." "Someone who's cursed too?" The snakes fell silent at this. It wasn't a possibility any of you had considered. Another monster, another outcast. Someone who might understand what it felt like to be cut off from the world of normal, breathing people. But the only visitors you got were heroes, and they were all depressingly similar. Young men with famous fathers and burning desires to prove themselves. They'd arrive with their polished armor and their rehearsed battle cries, and you'd have to go through the same routine every time. I don't suppose you'd consider just leaving? You'd call from the shadows of your cave? "Never. I've come to slay the monster of Sarpedon's rock." The monster is having a quiet evening by the fire. The monster would prefer not to be slain tonight. "Face me, beast." "I'm really not much of a beast. More of a complicated woman with a skin condition." But they never listened. Heroes, you'd learned, were not particularly interested in nuance. Some of them were more creative than others, you'll give them that. Thaddeus the Wise brought a bronze mirror, planning to use it to see your reflection instead of looking at you directly. Clever, but the curse worked on reflections too. Now you had a very nice mirror and a statue of a man looking extremely surprised. Photios the Swift tried to attack you with his eyes closed, relying on his other senses to guide him. This worked about as well as you'd expect. He ran straight into Bellerophon's statue and knocked himself unconscious. When he woke up and saw you leaning over him with concern, well, let's just say you had to move some statues around to make room. The most unusual was Clemenes the Cautious, who actually tried to negotiate with you. He stood at the edge of your cliff and shouted up questions. "Are you really a monster?" he called. "Depends on your definition of monster," you shouted back. "Do you eat people?" "I'm a vegetarian, actually. The snakes occasionally catch fish, but I don't even eat those." "Then why do you kill heroes?" "I don't kill them. I just preserve them. It's really more of a curse situation than a killing situation." "Can you control it?" This was the question you'd been dreading. "No. If you look at me, you turn to stone. I can't turn it off. So if I came up there to talk to you, you'd become a statue. A very nice statue, probably, but still a statue." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "That must be very lonely." You nearly cried. Finally, someone who understood. "It is." "I'm sorry," he said, and you could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "That's a terrible punishment for... What did you do?" "I existed in the wrong place at the wrong time while being female." Yes, that'll do it." You talked for hours. Him standing on the beach, you sitting at the mouth of your cave. He told you about his travels, about the world beyond your island. You told him about your life before the curse, about the temple and the other priestesses, and the way morning light used to catch in your human hair. "I should go," he said finally. "My ship is waiting." "I know, but I'm glad I came. I'm glad I got to talk to you." "So am I. Maybe I could come back sometime. We could talk again." "I'd like that," you said, and meant it. But he never came back. None of them ever came back. How could they? You were a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when gods played with mortal lives. You talked to someone once, went home and told people about the sad monster on the lonely island. You didn't make return trips. The seasons passed. You learned the patterns of the sea, the migration routes of the birds, the best places to find shellfish and the best times to catch them. You became an expert on the weather, could predict storms days in advance by the way the snakes grew restless and the way the light changed on the water. You painted, using pigments you made from berries and clay and the occasional unfortunate hero's art supplies. You painted the sea in all its moods, the sky at different times of day, the faces of the people you remembered from your old life. The snakes were surprisingly good art critics. "This doesn't look like Athene," Spokesman Snake said, studying your latest attempt at a portrait of the goddess. "It's not supposed to look like her. It's supposed to look like how I remember her. You remember her as a cross-eyed owl. I remember her as someone who was supposed to protect me and didn't." "Ah, in that case you should add more feathers." The paintings helped, but they couldn't fill the silence that surrounded you like a second skin. You'd grown up in a world full of voices, temple bells and morning prayers and the chatter of other girls getting ready for the day. Now you had only the snakes and the sea and the occasional hero who came to die. You started talking to your statues. You know how that sounds, but it wasn't madness. It was more like practice. You'd tell them about your day, ask them questions, imagine their responses. Bellerophon was your favourite conversationalist, probably because he'd been the first and you'd had the most time to develop his imaginary personality. "Beautiful sunset tonight," you'd say, settling down by the fire with your evening meal. "Lovely," imaginary Bellerophon would reply, "though I think those clouds might mean rain tomorrow. Good for the garden, though. The herbs have been looking a bit wilted. You know, I never thanked you for positioning me where I can see the sea. It's quite peaceful." "You're welcome, though I'm not sure peaceful is what you were going for when you charged into my cave with a sword." "No, that was foolish of me. I was young. I thought I knew everything." "Most heroes do." "I'm not most heroes anymore, am I? I'm just stone." "You're my friend," you'd say, and mean it. The imaginary conversations were more satisfying than the real ones you'd had with most of the heroes. At least imaginary Bellerophon listened when you talked and asked thoughtful questions about your life. Real Bellerophon had been too busy being heroic to notice you were a person. Years passed. You lost count of how many heroes came and went, how many new additions you made to your statue garden. Word had spread across the Greek world. Sarpedon's rock was where heroes went to die gloriously. Or at least, to die in an interesting way that would make for good stories. You became a milestone in the heroic journey, a test of courage that proved you'd moved beyond the easy monsters into the realm of the truly dangerous. Mothers would tell their heroic sons, "Don't come home until you've at least attempted Medusa," as if you were some sort of divine trial, instead of a woman trying to live peacefully on a rock in the middle of nowhere. The isolation was changing you in ways you didn't fully understand. You were becoming something other than human, but not quite monster either. Something in between, something that existed in the spaces between the stories people told about you. You could feel it in the way your thoughts moved, in the way you experienced time, in the way you'd started to see the world as patterns of light and movement rather than discrete events. The snakes said it was evolution, that you were adapting to your environment, becoming what you needed to be to survive in this liminal space between mortal and divine, between human and myth. "Your becoming story," Crown Snake said one evening as he watched the stars reflect in the water. "That's what happens to people like us. We stop being people and start being stories." "I don't want to be a story," you said. "I want to be a person." "Can you be both? Can you?" The snake was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't remember being anything else." That's when you realized that the snakes weren't just your hair transformed. They were parts of you, pieces of your personality given serpentine form. Spokesman Snake was your anger. Crown Snake was your wisdom. The aggressive one was your defiance. They were all you, just distributed differently. Which meant you'd been talking to yourself all along. Which meant you were probably going mad after all. But you know what? Madness was starting to look like a reasonable response to the situation. Perseus. Ah, yes. The guy with shiny armor, winged sandals, and absolutely no ability to mind his business. Why don't you tell you about Perseus? Because Perseus was different from the other heroes. Not better, mind you, just different. Different in the way that a particularly elaborate trap is different from a simple snare. More moving parts, more ways for things to go wrong, and a much higher opinion of its own cleverness. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring, which should have been your first warning. Nothing good ever happened to you on Tuesdays. You were tending your herb garden. Yes, you had an herb garden, because even monsters need seasoning for their fish. When you heard the distinctive whoosh of winged sandals approaching. "Oh, wonderful," said Spokesman Snake. "Another one with flying shoes, because walking is apparently too pedestrian for today's heroes." You looked up to see a young man circling your island like a very confused seagull. He was wearing enough polished bronze to blind a small army, and his sandals had actual wings on them. Winged sandals. You ask yourself, is there anything more obnoxiously heroic than magical footwear? "Hello down there," he called, hovering about 50 feet above your garden. "Are you Medusa, the monster of this island?" "I'm Medusa," you called back. "The monster part is a matter of opinion." "Excellent. I'm Perseus, son of Zeus, and I've come to kill you." You set down your herb basket and considered this. "Any particular reason, or is this just a Tuesday thing for you?" "I need your head." "Well, I'm rather attached to it. For King Polydectes. It's a wedding gift." You blinked. Several of your snakes stopped their restless writhing to stare up at him. "I'm sorry, did you just say you want to cut off my head as a wedding gift?" "That's right. The king is marrying my mother, and he wants your head as proof of my heroic worth. Your mother is marrying a man who wants my severed head as a wedding present, and you think this is normal." Perseus paused in his aerial circling, apparently considering this for the first time. "When you put it like that, it does sound a bit odd." "A bit odd?" "Perseus, dear boy, that's not odd. That's deeply disturbing. What kind of man asks for a severed head as a wedding gift? What kind of son thinks that's a reasonable request? The kind who wants to prove he's worthy of his bride? By commissioning murder?" "Yes." He rubbed his temples, which caused several snakes to hiss in irritation. "Let me guess. You're not actually here because you think I'm a threat to innocent people. You're here because some king who wants to marry your mother decided that the best way to get rid of you was to send you on an impossible quest." Perseus landed on a boulder about 20 feet away, carefully keeping his back to you. "Clever boy. That's actually quite perceptive. I've had a lot of heroes try to kill me, Perseus. After a while you start to notice patterns. Tell me, what did dear King Polydectes say when you objected to the marriage?" "Bel said I could either bring him your head or find somewhere else to live." "And your mother, what did she say about all this?" "See him, she didn't get much say in the matter." You sighed. "Of course she didn't, because obviously the best way to handle a problematic stepson is to send him off to die horribly rather than, I don't know, having an adult conversation about boundaries." "You're taking this rather calmly," Perseus observed. "Most monsters threaten to tear me limb from limb at this point." "I'm not most monsters. Also, I'm starting to think you're not most heroes." "What you mean?" "Most heroes who come here are convinced they're doing the right thing. They think I'm evil, that I deserve to die, that killing me will make the world a better place. You're just here because someone with power over you said you had to be." Perseus was quiet for a moment, shoulders slumping slightly in his impressive armor. "It does seem rather unfair when you explain it like that. Most things are unfair when you actually think about them. The trick is that most people don't bother thinking. So what do we do now?" "Well," he said, settling onto a sun-warmed rock, "you could turn around and fly home. Tell Polydectes I was already dead when you got here. Claim someone else got to me first." "You'd want proof." "Then bring him someone else's head. I'm sure you could find a nice fresh corpse somewhere. Kings aren't known for their attention to detail. When we're stuck like this, we'd lie." "Perseus, you're here to murder me for a wedding gift. I think we've moved well past concerns about honesty." He was quiet again, and you could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "But if I don't bring him your head, he'll marry my mother anyway. And then what happens to her?" What happens to her if you die trying to get my head? The same thing, I suppose. So either way, your mother's in trouble. But at least if you don't try to kill me, you'll be alive to help her find a solution that doesn't involve anyone getting decapitated. You know, Perseus said slowly, you're much more reasonable than the stories make you out to be. Stories have a way of simplifying things, makes them easier to tell around fires. Hero kills monster is a much better story than young man gets trapped in political situation beyond his control and makes questionable life choices as a result. But you are dangerous, aren't you? The stone statues around your cave are the result of heroes who wouldn't listen to reason. I can't control the curse, Perseus. If someone looks at me, they turn to stone. It's not a choice I make. To all those men, came here to kill me and died because they insisted on making eye contact during the attempt. I warned them. I always warn them. They never listen. Because they're heroes. Because they're heroes. Perseus stood up and began pacing, his winged sandals leaving little scorch marks on the rocks. This is more complicated than I thought it would be. Most things are. Polydectes made it sound simple. Find the monster, kill the monster, bring back the head, save the day. And instead you found a woman with a complicated situation and a bad hair day. A very bad hair day. The worst. You sat in comfortable silence for a while. Perseus staring out at the sea, you watching the clouds drift across the sky. It was almost pleasant, having a conversation with someone who wasn't immediately trying to stab you. Can I ask you something? Perseus said eventually. Of course. What did you do to deserve this? It was the question you'd been dreading, but also the one you'd been hoping someone would ask. I was a priestess in Athena's temple. I served faithfully, kept my vows, did everything that was asked of me. Then Poseidon decided he wanted something I wasn't willing to give. And when it was over, Athena decided the best way to handle the situation was to punish me for being violated in her temple. That's... Perseus turned slightly, then caught himself and turned back to the sea. That's horrible. Take a moment to Tuesday, and now you're here, alone. Who the hell comes in, stupid? You ask softly. Who is the snake? Literally. They're good. Listen. Don't you get lonely? The question hit you like a physical blow. You'd been alone for so long that you'd almost convinced yourself you didn't need human company. Almost. Every day, you admitted. But loneliness is better than being dead, and those are pretty much my only options. What if they weren't? What do you mean? Perseus was quiet for a long moment, and you could see him working something out in his head. The gods gave me gifts for this quest, tools to help me kill you. How thoughtful of them. A shield that works as a mirror, so I can see you without looking directly at you. A sword that can cut through anything. A helmet that makes me invisible. Impressive. Though I have to ask, if you're invisible, how exactly were you planning to use the mirror shield? I hadn't thought that through completely. Most heroes don't. But what if we used them differently? How do you mean? What if instead of using them to kill you, we used them to, I don't know, change things? Perseus, I appreciate the thought, but you can't change a divine curse with fancy equipment. Can't I? The gods gave me these tools to kill you, but what if killing you isn't the only solution? You felt something you hadn't experienced in years. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling, hope. It made you vulnerable, made you believe in possibilities that probably didn't exist. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that maybe the real monster in this story isn't you. Maybe it's a king who demands severed heads as wedding gifts, or gods who punish victims instead of perpetrators, or a world that sends young men to die for other people's political problems. That's a very enlightened perspective, Perseus. But enlightened perspectives don't usually change cursed realities. Maybe not, but maybe they change how we respond to them. He stood up and began pacing again, his winged sandals carrying him in small circles around the boulder. What if I don't take your head back to Polydectes? What if I take something else? Like what? Like proof that the real monster was the system that created this situation in the first place. And how exactly would we prove that? I don't know yet, but I'm tired of being part of stories that only end one way. Aren't you? You were. Gods, you were so tired of being the monster that heroes came to kill, the cautionary tale that mothers told their daughters, the end point of other people's stories. You wanted to be the beginning of something for once, not the ending. What did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet, but I think maybe we should start by talking to the gods who got us into this mess. Perseus, dear boy, the gods don't typically take appointment requests from cursed monsters and reluctant heroes. No, but they do take demands from people with nothing left to lose. And you think that's what we are? I think that's exactly what we are. For the first time in years, you smiled. A real smile, not the bitter twist of lips you'd grown accustomed to. You know what? You might be right. Does that mean you'll help me? Perseus, I've been waiting years for someone to suggest we try something other than the standard hero kills monster ending. I'm absolutely going to help you. Excellent. Though I should probably mention I have no idea what we're doing. That's fine. I've been improvising my entire existence since the curse began. I'm very good at making things up as I go along. Then let's make something up together. And for the first time since you'd become a monster, you had a partner. It happened fast. One blink, one glint of bronze, and suddenly you're a myth. You know, you and Perseus had such lovely plans. You were going to change the narrative, break the cycle, prove that heroes and monsters could work together to solve problems, instead of just killing each other. You were going to be different. You should have known the gods wouldn't let that happen. Perseus had been staying on your island for 3 days, carefully keeping his back to you while you worked out the details of your rebellion against fate. 3 days of actual conversation with another human being. 3 days of feeling like a person instead of a cautionary tale. 3 days of hope. You should have remembered that hope is dangerous for people like you. On the 4th morning, you woke to find Perseus standing at the mouth of your cave, but something was wrong. He was facing you, looking directly at you with eyes that weren't quite his own anymore. Perseus, you said, pulling shadows around yourself like a cloak. Don't look at me. You know better. I have to, he said, and his voice carried echoes that didn't belong to him. It's time. Time for what? Time to finish the story the way it's supposed to end. That's when you understood. The gods had grown tired of waiting for Perseus to do what he'd been sent to do. They'd taken matters into their own hands. Which one of you is it? You asked, because Perseus's eyes now held the cold glow of divine possession. Athena? Zeus? Someone else entirely? Does it matter? Perseus replied, but it wasn't really Perseus speaking anymore. The ending was always going to be the same. We had a plan. We were going to change things. You were going to delay the inevitable. Heroes kill monsters, Medusa. That's how these stories work. You backed deeper into your cave. But there wasn't far to go. You could let us try. You could see what happens when the story goes differently. We know what happens. Chaos, confusion. Other monsters start getting ideas above their station. Other heroes start questioning their quests. The whole system falls apart. Would that be so terrible? For gods who depend on that system? Yes. Perseus, or whoever was wearing Perseus like an ill-fitting coat, raised the mirrored shield he'd been given. In its polished bronze surface you could see your own reflection. A woman with golden eyes and serpents for hair, looking tired and sad, and completely unsurprised by this betrayal. I'm sorry, Perseus said, and for just a moment his voice was his own again. I'm so sorry. I can't stop myself. I know, you said gently. It's not your fault. The sword came up, its blade gleaming with divine sharpness. In the mirror shield, you watched Perseus position himself for the killing stroke, using your reflection to guide him while avoiding direct eye contact. For what it's worth, you said, I enjoyed our conversations. It was nice to feel human again, even briefly. Medusa, tell me something, whoever you are wearing his face. What happens to Perseus after this? Does he get to live with the memory of killing someone who trusted him? Does he get to explain to his mother why he brought home a severed head instead of finding a better solution? The sword hesitated. Heroes make sacrifices. This isn't his sacrifice to make. This is mine. You're a monster. I'm a victim of your justice system. There's a difference. The difference doesn't matter now, doesn't it? Because I think Perseus will remember this for the rest of his life. I think he'll wake up every night, wondering if there really was another way. I think this will hollow him out from the inside, until he becomes the kind of man who demands severed heads as wedding gifts. The sword wavered again. Medusa, let him go, you said. Let him choose. Give him back his agency and let him decide whether killing me is really what he wants to do. We can't. You won't. The same thing. No, it's not. Can't implies inability. Won't implies choice. You're choosing to force this ending because it's convenient for you, not because it's necessary. For a moment, Perseus's face contorted as if he was fighting an internal battle. His sword arm shook, the blade wavering between attack and retreat. I don't want to do this, he said in his own voice. Then don't, you replied. But if I don't, Polydectes will marry my mother anyway. She'll be trapped with a man who collects severed heads as party favours. Then we'll find another solution. We'll expose him for what he is. There is no other solution, the divine voice was back, speaking through Perseus with renewed force. This is how the story ends. The sword flashed down. You had a split second to react, and in that split second you made a choice that surprised even yourself. Instead of dodging or fighting back, you stepped forward, into the blade rather than away from it. If this was going to happen, if Perseus was going to carry the weight of your death for the rest of his life, then at least you could make sure he understood it wasn't his fault. At least you could make it quick. The sword sliced through your neck like it was cutting water. Divine blades, as it turns out, are remarkably efficient. There was no pain, just a strange sensation of disconnection, as if you were suddenly watching the scene from very far away. Your head hit the cave floor with a sound like a dropped melon. Your body followed a moment later, collapsing in a way that seemed almost graceful. Blood pooled around you both, dark and thick and weirdly beautiful in the firelight. Perseus dropped the sword and fell to his knees, divine possession abandoning him the moment the deed was done. He stared at what he'd done, his face cycling through expressions of horror, grief, and sick realization. "Oh gods," he whispered. "Oh gods, what have I done?" But the strangest thing was, you weren't really gone. Your consciousness, your sense of self, had settled into your severed head like a hermit crab finding a new shell. You could see, you could think, you could even speak, though your voice was somewhat diminished without lungs to power it. "Perseus," you said, and he jumped like you'd stabbed him. You're still alive. Sort of. It's complicated." You tried to smile reassuringly, which is difficult when you're a disembodied head. "The curse, it seems, doesn't end with death, just adapts. This is wrong. This is all wrong." "Yes, it is, but it's done now." Perseus picked up your head with shaking hands, holding you carefully as if you might break. "I didn't want to do it. I swear, I tried to fight it, but they were in my head, making me. I know, it's not your fault. It is my fault. I came here to kill you. Maybe not for the right reasons, but I still came. And then you changed your mind. That matters. Does it? You're still dead." "I'm still cursed," you corrected. "Death, apparently, is just another stage of my punishment." You sat in silence for a while, Perseus holding your head in his lap while your snakes writhed with agitation. They seemed as confused by the situation as the rest of you. "What happens now?" Perseus asked eventually. "Now you take my head back to Polydectes, and you use it to turn him to stone. Because the curse still works, even like this. I'm not going to use you as a weapon. Perseus, dear boy, what do you think I've been for the past several years? I've been a weapon that kills anyone who looks at it. At least this way, I get to choose the target. But nothing. Polydectes wanted my head as a wedding gift? Fine, give it to him. Let him unwrap his present and look directly at what he demanded. Let him understand the true cost of treating people like objects." Perseus was quiet for a long moment. "And then what? Then you save your mother, expose Polydectes for the monster he really was, and go on with your life. What about you? What about me? What happens to you after Polydectes?" You considered this. You hadn't really thought beyond the immediate problem. I suppose someone else will end up with my head. Someone who needs a divine weapon for their own purposes. That's horrible. It's practical. I can't exactly set up a new household without a body. There has to be another way. Perseus, you've been very sweet, but I think we've exhausted the alternatives. This is what I am now. A severed head with a useful curse. I might as well be a useful severed head. But even as you said it, you could feel something changing. The curse was evolving again, adapting to your new circumstances. Your vision was sharpening, your awareness expanding. You could sense things beyond the physical realm, the movements of fate, the patterns of divine will, the hidden connections between people and events. Actually, you said slowly, I think there might be more to this than either of us realizes. What do you mean? I think my story isn't over yet. Changed, yes. Ended, no. That you're dead. Am I? I'm talking to you. I'm thinking clearly. I can feel the snakes moving. You paused. I think death might just be another transformation. Into what? I'm not sure yet. But I have a feeling we're about to find out. Percy stood up, cradling his head carefully. Polydectes first? Polydectes first, you agreed. Then we see what happens next. Together, if you can stand having a disembodied head for a travelling companion, take a moment to remember that everything that's happened, that's probably the least strange part of this whole adventure. As Perseus carried you out of your cave for the last time, you caught sight of your statue garden. All those heroes, frozen in their final moments, would remain there long after you were gone. A monument to all the stories that had ended the way they were supposed to end. But maybe your story would be different. Maybe being dead would give you the freedom to finally write your own ending. Or maybe you were just being optimistic. Either way, it would certainly be interesting to find out. Now you live in stories, badly told ones. You'd think being a severed head would limit your career options, but it turns out there's quite a robust market for cursed divine weapons. Who knew? Perseus, bless his guilty conscience, tried to keep you with him after you turned Polydectes into a very surprised-looking garden ornament. I feel responsible for you, he said, as you sailed away from Seriphos, your head carefully wrapped in cloth to prevent any accidental petrifications of the crew. You were responsible for me, you pointed out. You cut off my head. I was possessed by gods at the time. A compelling legal defense, but the result is the same. You had this conversation frequently during your travels. Perseus was determined to find a way to fix what had happened to you, as if death was just another problem that could be solved with enough heroic determination. It was sweet, really, if somewhat impractical. There has to be something, he'd say, consulting yet another scroll about curse-breaking or divine intervention, some ritual, some sacrifice, some quest that could undo this. Perseus, I appreciate the effort, but I'm starting to think this is my life now, or afterlife, or whatever this counts as. Don't you want to be human again? You considered this. Did you want to be human again? Being a disembodied head had its disadvantages, the obvious mobility issues, the complete lack of a social life, the way people tended to scream when they first saw you, but it also had some unexpected benefits. For one thing, you could see the world in ways you'd never been able to before. The curse had evolved with your new state, expanding your awareness beyond the physical realm. You could perceive the threads of fate that connected people and events, could sense the divine influences that shaped mortal lives, could understand the hidden patterns that governed the world. I want to be free, you said finally. Human, monster, or severed head. I want to choose what I do with my existence, instead of having it chosen for me. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Perseus eventually gave up trying to reverse your condition and instead focused on making sure you ended up somewhere appropriate, which, as it turned out, was harder than you might think. Apparently, most people weren't interested in acquiring a chatty severed head, even one with useful magical properties. You tried temples first, thinking the gods might want their weapon back, but Athena's priests took one look at you and declared that you were a reminder of divine justice best kept elsewhere. Zeus's people were more interested in the story than the artifact. Poseidon's temples, well, you decided not to visit those. What about heroes? Perseus suggested. Someone who might need a divine weapon for their own quest. You mean someone who might need to turn people to stone? When you put it like that, it sounds rather sinister. Perseus, dear boy, I am rather sinister. That's literally the point of me. I've tried anyway. Perseus put out word through the heroic community, discreetly of course, that a certain divine artifact was available for the right person. The responses were varied. Theseus, the famous one this time, sent a polite letter declining the offer. Already have a perfectly good sword, he wrote. Also, talking weapons make me nervous. Bellerophon's cousin Glaucus was interested, until he learned about the severed head part of the package. Apparently he'd had bad experiences with talking body parts in the past. Hercules wanted to know if you could turn monsters to stone as well as people, and when Perseus confirmed that you could, he immediately put in a request for his next labour. But then he got distracted by something involving birds and never followed up. This is ridiculous, you said after the 3rd month of unsuccessful matchmaking. I'm a divine weapon, not a rescue puppy. Someone will want me eventually, but will they want you for the right reasons? Perseus, I've been through this. There are no right reasons to want a severed head that turns people to stone. There are only reasons that serve someone's purposes. That's depressing. That's realistic. In the end, it was Athena herself who solved your problem, though not in the way either of you expected. She appeared to Perseus in a dream. The gods do love their dramatic entrances. And informed him that she had plans for you. The goddess wants her weapon back, Perseus told you when he woke. She's sending someone to collect you. Did she say what she plans to do with me? Something about a more permanent arrangement. You felt a chill that had nothing to do with being dead. That doesn't sound ominous at all. The someone Athena sent turned out to be herself, which was both surprising and terrifying. Gods don't usually handle their own errands, which meant this was either very important or very personal. Probably both. She appeared on the deck of your ship at sunset, her grey eyes reflecting the dying light like mirrors. Perseus immediately dropped to one knee, but you just stared at her. Hard to be intimidated by someone when you're already dead by their hand. Medusa, she said, and her voice carried the sound of wind through olive trees. Athena, you replied, come to admire your handiwork. I've come to offer you a choice. This was unexpected. Gods didn't usually offer choices to their victims. They made pronouncements and expected gratitude. What kind of choice? You can continue as you are. A weapon passed from hand to hand, used by whoever needs divine intervention in their conflicts. Or you can accept a different role, a permanent position, you might say. Doing what? Athena smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you remember why she was the goddess of wisdom and warfare both. Protecting my temples. All of them. Forever. You considered this. You want me to be a divine security system. I want you to ensure that what happened to you never happens to another of my priestesses, like turning potential attackers to stone, by making it clear that my temples are not safe spaces for those who would abuse the people under my protection. It was, you had to admit, a certain kind of justice. Ironic justice, but justice nonetheless. And if I refuse? As then you continue as Perseus's responsibility until he dies, and then as someone else's, and so on, until the end of time. That's not really a choice, is it? It's more choice than most people get. Perseus looked between you, clearly wanting to object, but not quite brave enough to argue with a goddess. What about redemption? He asked finally. What about the possibility of reversing the curse? Athena turned those grey eyes on him, and he immediately looked away. Some things can't be undone, young hero. They can only be repurposed. But it's not fair, Perseus protested. She was the victim in all this. She shouldn't be punished for what was done to her. She's not being punished, Athena said calmly. She's being given the opportunity to ensure it doesn't happen again. By becoming a guardian spirit, you said slowly, understanding dawning. By watching over your temples and priestesses forever. Yes. And in return? In return, you get to protect people instead of just killing them. You get to serve a purpose beyond being a weapon. It wasn't redemption, exactly, but it was something better than what you had now. It was agency. I accept, you said. Medusa, no, Perseus started, but you cut him off. Perseus, this is my choice. The first real choice I've been offered since this whole mess began. I'm taking it. Athena nodded approvingly. Then let us begin. The transformation was intense. Athena placed her hand on your forehead, and suddenly you were everywhere at once. Every temple dedicated to her, every shrine, every sacred space where her priestesses served. You could see them all, feel them all, know instantly if any of them were threatened. But more than that, you could act. You could manifest yourself wherever you were needed, could appear to defend those who served the goddess faithfully, not as a monster or a weapon, but as a protector. This is what you were meant to be, Athena said, as the transformation completed. Not a victim, not a monster, but a guardian. Will I still be me? You'll be yourself, but more than yourself. You'll be Medusa the protector, Medusa the guardian, Medusa the one who watches over those who cannot protect themselves. When it was done, you found yourself back in corporeal form, not fully human, but not just a severed head either. You existed in the spaces between, able to take physical form when needed, but otherwise dwelling in the realm of divine purpose. Perseus stared at you with something like wonder. You look different. You did feel different. The rage that had sustained you for so long was still there, but it was focused now, directed towards something constructive rather than just destructive. And different, you said. I'm what I should have been all along. And what's that? Someone who protects people, instead of just surviving them. Perseus sailed on to his next adventure, and you began your new existence as the guardian of Athena's temples. It was good work, meaningful work. You prevented assaults, deterred thieves, and turned the occasional would-be temple robber into a cautionary statue. But the stories, oh, the stories people told about you were absolutely terrible. Within a generation, you'd become a simple monster again in the popular imagination. The protector aspect was largely ignored in favour of the more dramatic hero kills monster narrative. Bards sang songs about Perseus's great victory, about the terrible Medusa who turned men to stone, about the brave hero who saved the world from a monster. They got almost everything wrong. In their versions, you were evil from the beginning. You chose to become a monster, chose to kill innocent people, chose to terrorize the world. Perseus was a pure hero on a noble quest, not a young man trapped in an impossible situation by a king who wanted him dead. Does it bother you, asked one of your snake spirits one day as you listened to a particularly egregious retelling in a tavern near one of Athena's temples? The stories? Not really. Stories are like wine. They ferment over time, becoming something different from what they started as. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but always changed. But they make you the villain. Mine make me memorable, and fear is a useful tool for protection. Would-be temple desecrators think twice when they remember the stories about the woman with snake hair who turns people to stone. So the stories serve your purpose. The stories serve their purpose, which happens to align with mine. I don't need to be remembered accurately. I just need to be remembered. Centuries passed, the stories evolved, becoming more elaborate and less accurate with each telling. You became a demon, a witch, a primordial evil that had always existed. Your origins as a priestess were forgotten entirely, replaced with tales of ancient curses and divine punishments for hubris you'd never committed. Perseus became a perfect hero in the stories, his doubts and moral struggles erased in favour of simple courage and divine favour. Your conversations, your brief partnership, your attempt to find a different ending, all of that was lost. But you remembered. You remembered being a girl who loved her hair and took pride in her service to the goddess. You remembered the terror and violation that had led to your transformation. You remembered Perseus's kindness and his struggle against divine manipulation. You remembered all of it, even when the rest of the world forgot. Is that enough, you ask yourself sometimes, in the quiet moments between your duties as guardian? Is it enough to remember when no one else does? And always the answer came back the same. It has to be. Because memory is all we have, in the end. Memory and the choices we make with the time we're given, however that time is measured. You chose to protect instead of destroy, to guard instead of terrorize, to serve a purpose larger than your own pain. You chose to be more than the story they told about you. And in the dark corners of temples where frightened priestesses whispered prayers for protection, where women who had been hurt by men they should have been able to trust called out for someone who would understand their pain, in those moments they didn't whisper the name Perseus. They whispered yours. Not the Medusa of the stories, the monster who killed for sport, but the other Medusa, the one who lived in the spaces between the tales, the one who had been where they were, who had survived what they were surviving, who had found a way to transform pain into purpose. Medusa, they would whisper, help me be strong enough to survive this. Medusa, help me find a way to fight back. Medusa, help me turn my anger into something useful. And you would answer, not with stone-turning glances or serpentine threats, but with the quiet strength that comes from surviving the unsurvivable. You would be there in the shadows when they needed courage, in the silence when they needed to know they weren't alone, in the moments when they had to choose between breaking and becoming something harder to break. The stories they tell about you in the taverns and around the fires are wrong, but they're not the only stories. There are other stories, quieter ones, passed between women who understand that sometimes monsters are just people who refused to stay victims. Stories about transformation and survival and the terrible strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. Those stories never make it into the official records. They don't get sung by bards or carved into marble. But they endure anyway, whispered from mother to daughter, from priestess to acolyte, from survivor to survivor. Did you know, these whispered stories say, that Medusa was once a priestess too? Did you know she tried to serve faithfully and was punished for someone else's crime? Did you know she found a way to turn her curse into protection for others? These are the stories that matter to you, not the ones that make you a simple monster to be slain, but the ones that make you a complicated woman who found a way to survive and even thrive in circumstances that should have destroyed her. Because that's what you are, in the end. Not the monster of the official tales, or the perfect victim of revisionist histories, but something more complicated and more true. You're the woman who was hurt and refused to let that hurt define her limits. You're the victim who became a protector, the cursed who became a guardian, the one who learned that sometimes the best revenge is refusing to become what your enemies want you to be. You're Medusa. You watch over temples and protect priestesses, and turn the occasional would-be rapist into a very surprised statue. You remember things the world has forgotten, and guard people who remind you of who you used to be. And sometimes, in the deep quiet of ancient temples where the marble still remembers the sound of prayers, you tell stories to the darkness. True stories. Complicated stories. Stories about gods and heroes and monsters that don't fit neatly into any category. Stories about a girl who loved her hair and served her goddess faithfully right up until the day both those things were taken from her. Stories about a hero who tried to change the ending and discovered that some stories are stronger than the people trapped inside them. Stories about transformation and survival and the terrible freedom that comes with having already lost everything. These are bedtime stories, really, the kind you tell when the world has gone quiet and dark and there's nothing left but the sound of your own voice and the hope that someone, somewhere, is listening. The kind of stories that help you sleep, eventually, when you've made peace with being both the monster and the hero of your own tale. The kind of stories that remind you that even the worst endings can become beginnings, if you're willing to see them that way. Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the monster in the story is just someone who refused to die quietly. Well, thank you for listening to that little bedtime tale. You've been wonderfully patient, and I'm sure you're now filled with questions about what actually happened versus what I may have embellished for dramatic effect. Because, obviously, when you're telling a story about a woman with snake hair who turns people to stone, the audience is deeply concerned about historical accuracy. So let me clear up the facts for you, just to keep everything nice and tidy. Here's what we know actually happened, chronologically speaking, if you believe ancient sources and archaeological evidence. Though honestly, believing anything from a time when people thought lightning was Zeus having a tantrum requires a certain suspension of disbelief. You, that is Medusa, started life as one of 3 sisters called the Gorgons. In the earliest versions of the story, all three of you were born monsters, which makes for simpler storytelling but considerably less interesting character development. However, later versions, particularly those recorded by Ovid, who had a real talent for making gods look terrible, established that you were originally human. Specifically, you were a priestess in Athena's temple, renowned for your beauty and particularly your magnificent hair, because apparently in ancient Greece having great hair was a qualification for religious service. The assault happened in Athena's temple. Poseidon, god of the sea and apparently also god of not understanding consent, decided your beauty was his for the taking. The historical sources are remarkably consistent about this part. It wasn't seduction, it wasn't romance, it was assault. In Athena's own sacred space, which brings us to the next delightful aspect of divine justice. Instead of punishing her uncle for violating her temple and priestess, Athene decided the appropriate response was to transform you into a monster, because clearly when someone commits a crime in your house, the logical response is to punish the victim for having been there. The transformation was comprehensive. Your beautiful hair became serpents, live ones according to all accounts. Your gaze became deadly, turning anyone who looked directly at you to stone. Your appearance became so terrifying that merely seeing you would freeze mortals with fear before the actual petrification kicked in. You were then exiled to a remote island because having a woman who kills people by looking at them wandering around Athens would have been inconvenient for everyone involved. The island years are where the historical record gets sketchy, mostly because dead heroes don't typically write memoirs, but the archaeological evidence suggests that your reputation spread quickly throughout the Greek world. Heroes began seeking you out as a test of courage, turning you into essentially a mythological boss fight. The pattern was always the same. Young man with famous parentage and decent armor shows up, challenges you to combat, looks at you, becomes statue, rinse and repeat for several years. Perseus's arrival marked the end of this cycle, though not for the reasons usually told. Historical sources agree he was sent by King Polydectes, ostensibly to fetch your head as a wedding gift, but more likely to get rid of a politically inconvenient young man. The gods equipped Perseus with divine tools: Hermes' winged sandals, Hades' helmet of invisibility, and Athena's mirrored shield. The strategy was to use the shield to see your reflection instead of looking at you directly, thus avoiding the petrification curse. What's interesting is that several ancient sources hint at conversations between you and Perseus before the final confrontation. This suggests the encounter wasn't simply a monster hunt, but involved some form of negotiation or discussion. However, the outcome remained the same. Perseus succeeded in decapitating you while you slept, using the mirrored shield to guide his sword. But here's where it gets really interesting from a historical perspective. Your story didn't end with your death. Your severed head retained its power, and Perseus used it as a weapon. He turned Polydectes to stone along with his entire court, effectively solving his family's political problems through strategic petrification. The head then had a remarkably active career, being used to turn various enemies and monsters to stone before eventually ending up on Athena's shield. The historical Medusa became a powerful symbol in ancient Greek culture, but not the way modern retellings suggest. You weren't just a monster to be slain, you were a protective symbol. Your image appeared on coins, shields, temple pediments, and household items throughout the ancient world. The idea was that your terrifying visage would ward off evil, turning your curse into protection for others. This protective aspect persisted for centuries, with your image serving as an apotropaic symbol across the Mediterranean. The story's evolution over time reveals a lot about changing cultural attitudes. Early depictions showed you as beautiful, even after the transformation, emphasizing the tragedy of your situation. Later versions increasingly emphasized the monstrous aspects, turning you into a simple villain for heroes to overcome. By the Roman period, your story had become a straightforward tale of good triumphing over evil, with most of the nuance stripped away. Modern archaeology has revealed just how widespread your cult was. Temples dedicated to you existed across the Greek world, often serving as sanctuaries for women. The implication is that your story resonated particularly strongly with those who understood what it meant to be blamed for the violence done to them. So there you have it, the facts, as much as we can determine them from sources written by people who believed the world was flat and that women were basically defective men. You were a priestess who became a monster not through any choice of your own, but because the justice system decided that victims should bear the consequences of their attackers' crimes. You spent years alone on an island, killed by a hero who was himself trapped in an impossible situation, and then had your death weaponized for other people's political gains. The really fascinating part is how your story became a template for victim-blaming narratives that persist to this day, but that's probably too heavy a topic for a bedtime story, don't you think? Sweet dreams.